back. You're still watching Daybreak on this 4th day of November 2025, and key developments. Tanzania has a new president, has a new term for President Samia Suluhu, and we'll be looking at the top stories in the papers. But first, to introduce the panelists who are here in studio. Chachi Luguti is an economist at the IC Group. Good morning.
Good morning.
Ikua Mbote is a business practitioner. Good morning.
Good morning, Sam. How are you?
I am well. It's good to see you.
Good to see you.
There is Alex Rithi, head of programs at the Institute of Social Accountability. Good morning.
Good morning, Sam.
And Steve Biko-Afula is an industrialist and also runs Soko Analyst. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
I am well. It's good to see all of you here. And Alex and Churchill were together last week as we were talking about the options for government when it comes to financing of government operations, but at the same time, the privatization law that has come into force. This morning in the papers, you'll find on the front page of the Daily Nation, Samia sworn into office in private ceremony. It is one of the main stories. It is continued on page 4 and 5, and you'll find a very moving story of my brush with death in Tanzania. Lizzie Adundo Yogo was one of the international observers sent to Tanzania to monitor the elections. Then mayhem unfolded, and she spoke to the Daily Nation on the nightmare she went through and how finally she got back home in Kenya. I noticed a bullet hole and bullet casing right where I had been. I had escaped death by a whisker. It's what she talks about. Of course, the election was held on the 29th of Wednesday. Many voices have called it a sham election. We've seen an observation report from SADC team, and they are saying that they observed low voter turnout in most of the polling stations they visited, but when it came to the outcome, you find that it has been a record high with 31.5 million Tanzanians voting for Samia Suluhu. Never mind that 5 years ago, only 12 million people voted for John Pombe Magufuli in an election that the opposition was also taking part in. And the SADC team is recommending different issues, including the Tanzanian people reviewing their constitution to also allow a court challenge of presidential election, because at the moment, once the INEC, the Electoral Commission in Tanzania, announces or declares an outcome in an election, then you cannot challenge it in any law. No court of law has jurisdiction over a presidential election in Tanzania. But here we are, 97% later, or 31.5 million reasons later, Samia Suluhu was sworn in, and the Daily Nation considers that to be a private ceremony in a story that says Ruto Museveni's skip event sent deputies. Of course, Professor Kithure Kindiki was there representing President William Ruto and the country in his capacity. Front page of the Standard, a bloody crown, apart from Zambia's Hakainde Hichilema, whose own rise from a jail cell under Edgar Lungu mirrors Tanzania's Tundu Lissu. Most of the leaders who flocked to Dodoma for President Samia Suluhu's swearing in carried the same tarnish. Among them was Kenya's Deputy President Kithure Kindiki, hardened by last year's Gen Z protest that left scores dead. Together they stood, a fraternity of power honed in silencing dissent, shielding their regimes from scrutiny and securing victory through the shadows of a disputed election. I'm not sure the last statement is fair to Professor Kithure Kindiki, because really he didn't face the elections in 2022. Steve, your thoughts about Tanzania?
It's actually a very sad day for Africa and for democracy. If the late Julius Nyerere were to wake up today, I think he'll be very disappointed, and he will really wonder what happened to his beloved country. It's come out very, very clearly that the East African region is no longer a region of democracy and what is fair, but a region that has clung to power through killing and butchering of young people who stand up for what they believed was the essence of democracy. So it's a very sad day for East Africa, it's a very sad day for Africa, and it's a very sad day for what we used to call democracy.
Right, and Alex, we've seen, well, you stand for accountability in Kenya. I don't know if your mandate stretches to our neighbors, but the president of Tanzania is actually saying that some of the demonstrators came from Okay. Our neighboring countries, end of quote. I don't know if that includes Kenya, but then again, how can governance, transparency, accountability thrive in a situation where you can't even challenge a vote?
Well, if the president of Tanzania says some people came from the neighboring countries, our largest or nearest border to Nairobi, for instance, is the Tanzanian border. So, and we saw what was happening in Amanga. But save for that, I think what we are seeing is an awakening of the people, because you look at what happened in Tanzania and think about what happened in Kenya in 2024, 2025, what has happened, just happened in Madagascar, Nepal, and Cameroon and other places. Yeah. We are seeing a situation where the people are awakening, and that is why actually I think the analogy by the Daily Nation that this was a private ceremony would mirror what we saw in Kenya in 2007, in my view. And this would be maybe a point at which Tanzania needs to ask themselves, where do we need to go? If you recall, before 2007 in our own space, we did not have regulations or laws that define how an inauguration happens, the timing and all that. But after that, now we have what we have. You cannot be sworn in private. It has to be within a certain time limit. I think it can't be beyond 2 p.m. So this is an awakening period for Tanzania and maybe for the rest of the region, in my view. But it's a sad story, in my view. I would have expected to see the 30+ million people being allowed at least to come and celebrate their win. But in this case, it's private.
Wow, you expect too much. Ikua, how does this affect? Because we've seen a couple of stories of what has been happening at our borders with Tanzania, whether it's Namanga or is it Lunga Lunga. How does this affect business between the two countries, and for how long can you do this?
Well, as you may be well aware, Sam, whenever there is demonstrations, whenever there is any sort of instability within any country, movement of goods and services is obviously the first victim, because you cannot be able to put in your truck or your goods into a demonstration square where you know very well you're going to end up being routed. Anytime there is demonstrations, obviously shops closes. The people who are demonstrating are probably workers from, farms. Kenya and Tanzania does a lot of businesses, especially the produce that we normally receive from them. If you go to Namanga, for example, you would find kilometers of trucks lining up coming into Kenya, especially with maize and other cereals that we import. It is also our gateway from importations that we could be importing from the rest of the commercial countries, like Zambia, for example, because we have business in Kenya going all the way down to Malawi for importation. So this is obviously affecting movement of goods, and it is affecting businesses as well. In any country that this kind of unrest is happening, you also expect the local businesses to be affected in a big way. We've seen this in Kenya, especially when we've had Maandamano Tuesdays, when we've had the Gen Z protests and all that. The first victim is, of course, the shops. And the shops meaning that you have to shut down your shop whenever you see a demonstration. So economically, it's a big loss. And obviously right now, many businesses have been affected, especially those who have been solely relying on Tanzanian imports, especially for those dealing with farm produce as a way of income. You can bet, your bet is as good as mine, that currently these have stopped. But further from the truth, other than the fact that the business is affected, I do not really think that the kind of leadership we are seeing coming up within our East African region really cares about how much the businesses could be affected of anybody's livelihood that have been affected by their conduct. The conduct in Tanzania started way back when they decided to put their main opposition leader in jail. It is a political convenience when you see the main opposition leader being arrested, well, months before the election, which means this is something that Tanzania planned way before, and it is unfortunate for for any reader to think that their citizens, including ourselves, who have interest in Tanzania in terms of businesses and relationships, as we call ourselves, Africa Mashariki, to be able to think or to see that the readers do not see or do not think that we can see through all these plans.
Right.
When you arrest Tundu Lissu, when you start deporting the likes of Akina Martha Karua who are going for a court case hearing to just ensure that there is justice in terms of how the dispensation of that particular case is done, we can see through, or we can see through. And the end of it, having an election that you are alone. There was a lot of jokes that was happening online, where people are saying that you find in the ballot paper there is Mama Samia, then there is Suluhu, and there is all that. Everybody else who was in that ballot paper is a government stooge and an employee of the government. They were just there to make sure that they legitimize that particular election. However, it is unfortunate for business community. It's unfortunate that this is the kind of governments that we are forming. And at this time and age, that people still think that becoming dictatorial in whatever means and manner, it is how to serve your people. It is unfortunate.
But Iko, you must have heard the President Suluhu saying that akawashukuru wale 16 kwa sababu walishindana kwa hoja. Siri ya hoja.
Difficult Kiswahili or not, you cannot thank your own employees. Those who are definitely government. I would even want to see the profiles of those particular citizens. I would not be surprised to find they were all former Chama Pinduzi members and whatever it is, because obviously you can tell they were not into that election into winning.
Yeah.
They were just escorting someone and legitimizing what it is that particular person was achieving in that election. And that can be seen in white and black. I mean, you don't require a rocket scientist to tell. Okay. I think even the lowest of a candle in the Tanzanians, food chain can tell what I'm saying. It's true.
Okay, now, Churchill, look, in the East African community, and you find all those countries and the challenges that we are witnessing when it comes to the democratic front, whether it's Rwanda with its 98-99% support for Paul Kagame in the elections, whether you're talking about DRC, I think they had a 70% support for the president, whether it's Burundi, with all its challenges, security and stability. South Sudan never had an election since independence, which was in 2011. Uganda, do you want us to talk about Uganda? And of course now Tanzania. I mean, where then do we stand as a country that is trying to work so hard in the East African community, but our peers, there are certain values they don't think to be important, even when you have to look at their legal frameworks?
Thanks, Sam. Also, just to reiterate what my colleagues have said, it's an unfortunate turn of events that has happened in Tanzania. Just looking at even the headline, The Standard, a bloody crown, and then there are also pictures of dead bodies. So, I mean, even that hasn't even come to the limelight as such. I'm just saying that some of these issues are just being swept under the carpet. But what also you realize, and this is something that I reached out to some of my acquaintances based in Tanzania. Earlier yesterday, I just sent them a WhatsApp message, no response up until around 5 p.m. That's when it's like it was a coordinated response. So that's when it occurred to me that now internet had been restored. So the point I'm trying to bring is now, some of the institutions that ideally should be able to ensure that the countries that you're speaking about are quite strong. There's a dearth of credibility in some of those institutions. For the case of Tanzania, if you look at it, internet being shut, electricity supply not being there. So it speaks to institutions quite weak. And in the context of democracy, at least if we have institutions that are quite strong, we may not tend to where some of these countries are. So we need to have robust institutions that could be able to ensure that democracy works. At least for Kenya, you see that even in our constitution, there's a recourse to, if at all there's an electoral fraud or there isn't something that is unbecoming in terms of the electoral process, people can go to the High Court, and we've seen electoral petitions being put within the context of a judicial system. In some of these countries that you've mentioned, that is not there. So we need to see strong institutions which will now supplement even the democracy. At least that's a first step in what these countries needs to ensure is in place.
Okay. And of course the SADC preliminary report on the election observation is making serious recommendations, but also highlighting that the provision in the Constitution of Tanzania that effectively bars any court from entertaining any challenge against the results of a presidential election is contrary to the expectation of electoral justice as envisaged in Article 4.1.5 of the SADC principles and guidelines governing democratic elections. And so they're recommending various things, including that Tanzania comes up with, let me just read it as it is, in line with the SADC principles and guidelines governing democratic elections of 2021, the government and the National Assembly are urged to prioritize an inclusive process of the review of the constitution of the country with a view to soliciting public views on the current and future modalities with respect to independent political candidates, permitting election petitions related to the presidential election, and judicial review of some of the decisions of the electoral management bodies. Really quite a lot of work to do for not just Tanzania, but also the East African region with the countries that continue to face all these challenges.